Beautiful Livermore, California. I've never actually been out to this part of the state before, and my mom was commenting that now she and my dad want to move here, which as an incoming freshman to Berkeley is obviously terrifying for me. And so huge congratulations to the scholarship winners here. What you've done is really incredible. I enjoyed hearing about the accomplishments of Asian Americans in science. And I think that what we really need to see for more students is role models, because I look around at my classmates and many of them don't know who Stephen Chu is. Many of them haven't really read the stories that you guys described so beautifully, and I think that that's something we can all change with more positive media images of Asian Americans in sciences as well as all areas, I think. So my talk today is called Redefining Merit, Changing Culture, and I think that it's a talk that is wider than Asian American culture. It's really about the culture that we create in the United States around success and what we think merit is. And this has ramifications for the way that we hire young people, for the way that we think about the way we calling someone successful or not, and I hope that it'll be an interesting talk. But I want to start with my childhood. And around the same time that I began writing short stories and being interested in history and thanks, and language arts, I have a huge confession to make, and that's that I wanted to be white. When I became aware of the fact that my friends looked different from me, I decided that I wanted to look either like them or like Barbie, or at one point, I decided that I wanted to look kind of like Princess Merida from the movie Brave, except I'd never even seen that movie because it hadn't come out yet, but the whole red hair, green eyes, that was totally my jam. When I was 8 or 9, and I'm really surprised my parents didn't ask more questions about this, but I would slather on sunscreen and wear hats obsessively. And I would just say, oh, it's because I'm worried about skin cancer, or something like that. And I questioned this, looking back, because it was so silly. I realized that when I was 8 or 9, I feared yet another well-meaning old lady at the supermarket saying, oh, look at this cute little Asian girl. And so I clung to this half of me that was a smattering of Czech and every other Western European country. That's why I have a funny last name. And I would actively correct people when they said my hair was black. I'd be like, no, it's dark brown. It says so on my ID. I hated going to Chinese school on Saturdays, even though I managed somehow inexplicably to scrape an A-. I hated saying, I know, this is a disappointment. I hated saying my Chinese name, which I could barely pronounce correctly out loud. And I hated that reporters in these TV interviews would ask me the stupid question with a bright-eyed smile, where are you from? Although I enjoyed telling them Springfield, Oregon, which is where I was born. You see, that question, where are you from, poignantly reminded me that even though I'd never spent a single year of my life living anywhere but the United States, even though my mom didn't speak English with an accent and my dad was white, the way I looked would always make people question if I was 100% American. And I had it easy in comparison to so many people I know, because as I started to become more aware of this kind of odd childhood thing where I wanted to be white, I talked to more people and asked them, what was your experience growing up being Asian? And one of my friends, Jessica, who's a sophomore in high school, said this. I'm one of the darkest people in my extended family, even though I rarely spend time in the sun, and my relatives would always comment on it. I hated my Asian features. Another friend, one of my closest friends, remembers staring at her mirror and practicing opening her eyes wide enough to temporarily create an eyelid crease. There's an entire clinic in Southern California, the Asian Eyelid Center, that exists to just do surgeries to give people creases. Never in my childhood, looking in the mirror, would I have thought that some tiny fold of skin would be part of my privilege. What I realized was that this desire to be white was more than skin deep. I wanted to be different because of what it represented. Being white meant being represented, being seen and being heard. In almost every movie I watched, biography, I read, documentary, I saw, TV channel I turned on, the main character was someone white. Because I was so interested in public service and politics, my earliest role models were presidents and princesses and prime ministers from the United States and Europe. There were plenty of people like Eleanor Roosevelt and Elizabeth I to look up to if I wanted them, but I rarely, if ever, found someone who looked like me. There was Gary Locke, the first Chinese-American governor of any state in the United States. Luckily, my state, Washington, represent. But I could think of few Asian-American women in politics, and I looked for them. There's this documentary called Misrepresentation, which focuses on images of women in the media. And there's a very powerful line, which is this: you can't be what you can't see. Image is vitally important, and if we can't be what we can't see, then Asian American students have a limited set of options. Because in thinking about this, I asked, where are the Asian American politicians, CEOs, rock stars? Where will the Asian Steve Jobs come from if his parents never let him drop out of college? Be honest, would you? So that little girl in me who wanted someone who looked like her to look up to and plaster on her wall alongside Hillary Clinton and Eleanor Roosevelt, yes, I was a really nerdy kid, demands change. You see, a culture focused on achievement is not a bad thing. Indeed, it can lead to so many concrete gains for our nation and the world. We heard examples of them in the essays today. But today I want to challenge everyone in the room to redefine what achievement is, not just for Asian Americans, but for everyone. Because a narrow-minded definition of what achievement is, a definition of achievement that places tradition and conformity as its highest virtues, limits the potential, especially for young people, to innovate. Promoting divergent thinking, creativity, and questioning authority is imperative for the advancement of all of us, and particularly minority communities in STEM and beyond. So let's reconsider our definition of merit to make it more inclusive and provide role models to people that reflect their own realities. Now, my thinking about what achievement is began in a really weird place, which was me browsing Facebook and noticing that some of my friends had posted a photo of them at my school district, and they were all National Merit semi-finalists, so they were receiving a commendation from the district. They had big smiles on their face, they were exuberant, and I knew, looking at that photo and knowing my friends and where they're going, that this group of students is going to get the absolute best that life can hand them. Some are going to Ivy League schools, going to prestigious science research summer programs, winning tens of thousands of dollars in scholarships. They stand on the precipice of their lives, in control of their lives, and they are owning it. Now let's backtrack a little. How did they get here? Well, when they were 6 years old or 12 years old, they took a test and got into a gifted program, and from there they slid into honors and AP classes like they were born for them. They made straight A's and took the PSAT and scored in the top percentile. Their story isn't especially unique. It's a story that describes many teenagers around the nation who knew what hoops they had to jump through and jumped with a beautiful choreography that would make gymnastics Olympians proud. I used to believe that it was very simple, that the people with the highest scores and perfect grades and joyful smiles simply earned them. But today I wonder, even as much as I love those people, as much as they are some of my closest friends, if we overestimate what one test on one day can tell us about any given person's qualifications for the best schools, the best jobs, the best lives. Most importantly, my hope is that you will walk away today with the idea that merit and what we think it is needs to be expanded beyond mere smartness and into the many areas of excellence that represent the diversity of a given population and the diversity of needs in an economy. There's a really interesting article in New York Magazine that I read a few months ago, and it's called Paper Tigers by Wesley Yang. And the author asks the provocative question, what happens to all the Asian American overachievers when the test taking ends? Exhibit A for that overachieving comes from New York City, where at Stuyvesant High School, an extraordinarily selective public high school, they determine entrance based solely on performance on a test. And you can see that the stats they pretty much tell the story. The top 3.7% of all students who take the specialized high school admissions test hoping to go to Stuyvesant are accepted. Asian Americans are 12.6% in New York City. They make up 72% of the high school. All throughout Flushing, as well as in Bayside in New York City, one can find cram schools that line the streets that prepare people for the specialized high school admissions test on weekends, after school, and during breaks. And there was this quote from one of the instructors who said, learning math is not about learning math, it's about weightlifting. You are pumping the iron of math. What I found to be really, really depressing about this was that single line, learning math is not about learning math. Because there's definitely something to practice, but it also completely loses any kind of beauty. and a kind of appreciation for something deeper. And then a student put it way more bluntly. He said, "You learn quite simply to nail any standardized test you take." However, it's precisely that testing culture that has shifted focus from that which can be learned to that which can be trotted out and performed on a test, eroding intrinsic motivation and natural desire to learn. As I was doing more research on what makes people tick, what makes them motivated, I read a lot of the work of the author Daniel Pink, who writes a lot about business, and I saw a speech of his where he talked about commissioned versus non-commissioned work. So his definition of commissioned work was what you get paid for, what you get rewarded for. You do it for the grade or the score or the pay raise or just to keep your job. And he also talked about non-commissioned work, stuff like Google's 20% time or the free time that FedEx gives its employees. And he said that people came up with significantly more innovative work and even worked longer hours when they were pushing themselves, when they had this free time and when they had the opportunity to come up with something of their own invention. I realized quickly that it's passion, not the fear of loss or the desire for a reward that drives us. It's passion, not fear of loss, that leads to creative productivity. There's a startup company called Mind Valley in Kuala Lumpur that I visited to give a talk. And it won an award for being one of the most democratic workplaces in the world for the 5th year in a row. One of the things that I found hilarious about Mind Valley, aside from the fact that they were chill with me giving a talk wearing no shoes, and that their office looked like something a university kid at Berkeley might have dreamed up, it was very creative, it was just the language on their website. And they recruited employees for their annual Awesomeness Fest with this language: whip out a blender, throw in epic dreams, bleeding-edge technology, and quirky work culture, and grind them into a gooey, delicious pulp. What you'll get is Mind Valley, one of the world's biggest and weirdest online publishing companies in the personal growth industry. So think about that gooey, bleeding-edge technology, weird pulp, and compare that to the language you may have seen on your GE or Johnson & Johnson or Microsoft recruiting websites. I think that most of those companies are significantly less colorful, significantly less personal, or to put it more bluntly, significantly less epic, bleeding edge, quirky, gooey, delicious, and weird. Now when I look at two different sets of language like that, and I question myself and what I want from a company, what I want from a school, what I want from anywhere where I might go to work, then I ask myself who I am. And I think that I and a lot of my peers are looking for more of that quirky, bleeding edge deliciousness. So if what we need in the workplace is more independent creating, then what we need in school is more independent learning. At Monument Mountain High School in Massachusetts, a handful of teens in a room conducting something called the Independent Project are helping to change education. If I asked you what would happen if you put a bunch of teenagers in a room, the answers might vary. I think that a lot of adults, particularly anyone who's a parent of a teenager, who here is a parent of a teenager? See some raised hands? See some raised hands? Okay. So I'm guessing that the answers might be significantly more grim as far as your outlook. Well, these students got together and launched an innovative school within a school program. It was built on the idea that students could be independent learners within a collaborative peer group. And instead of focusing on spoon-feeding a set curriculum to students, instead of spending chunks of hours on AP Lit and AP Calc and the rest, they divided half of their day for a major independent endeavor, like writing a novel, learning to play the piano, recording an album, and half of the day for inquiry-based learning in the natural and social sciences. The students addressed questions that they were interested in and came up with every day. Questions like, is there science behind old wives' tales, to how do mice react to aromatherapy? And they actually obtained aforementioned mice and tested this out. They read more books in 8 weeks than their AP Lang class did in the entire school year. And more importantly, they loved it. Students from across the academic spectrum, from special ed to straight A, piled into a spare room that was their coach's locker room apparently, and they started transforming this random room into a home base for learning, bringing in shelves, painting the walls. The power of the Independent Project is best summarized, I think, by the Antoine Saint-Exupéry quote at the beginning of a documentary of the project. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. I want this to be what education does. I want this to be what education is. Not the 4 years that prepare me for tests, but the 4 years that make me fall deeply in love with learning, or never make me fall out of love with it in the first place. I think that this has many applications for our work environment as well, because when you think about it, The way that very traditional companies work is often dividing up the work, drumming up the men to gather wood, dividing the work, etc. When you think about a company with a strong mission, or an organization that really invests in all of its employees a sense of working towards something greater, then you see that vast and endless sea rolling ahead of you. People question, though, why I, as this 16-year-old student who's just finishing high school, why I have all these opinions about this, and haven't meritocracies that rely on tests existed for way longer than I've been around. Well, yes, that's true. Historically, meritocracies have existed in some shape or form for ages. If you look at the imperial exam, China's examination for civil service, then you'll realize that that recruited workers for top-level bureaucracy positions long before the United States even existed. However, as I was doing more research into merit and all of its facets, I realized that the word meritocracy first entered the popular lexicon because of a British member of parliament named Michael Young, who wrote a book in 1958 called The Rise of the Meritocracy. And it described a new British social system, the meritocracy, that would create the new elite, not based on who their parents were, but rather by testing all children and then segregating them, putting the kids who scored the highest into the best schools with the greatest resources. This sounds familiar, doesn't it? It sounds familiar because we do it. We do it in elite public secondary schools in New York City that only take the top 3.7% of test takers. We do it in gifted programs in our school districts. To go back to Michael Young's book, The Rise of the Meritocracy, here's the kicker. Michael Young never set out to create an ideal. He said in 2001 that the book was a satire, meant to be a warning, a dystopia. Clearly, we never got that memo. Our society runs on the hubris of believing that we know the ins and outs of the science of quantifying merit. But here's the thing, and I know that y'all are science people and love numbers, but I hope that you'll agree with me when I say there are some kinds of merit that can't really be quantified, that can't be tested. Take a moment to talk with your neighbor, whoever's closest to you, about the most important lesson you've learned in your life, whether in or out of the classroom.